Black CEO finds a shivering nurse at a bus stop. What follows changes both their lives forever. Subscribe to the channel and write in the comments where you're watching this video from. Come with me. A wealthy executive discovered a shivering nurse at a bus stop, brought her to his home, and from that day on, her life was changed. The snow descended with a relentless intensity, blanketing the streets of New York in a thick, hushed layer of white. It was long after midnight, and the city that never sleeps seemed to have finally succumbed to the storm's lullaby. Street lamps cast a muted orange glow through the swirling mist, and the wind howled between deserted skyscrapers. A sleek black sedan navigated the empty road, its tires making soft imprints in the fresh snow. Inside, Malik Osei held the leather steering wheel with one hand while adjusting the heat with the other. The world beyond the glass was a blizzard of white, and while he had no real destination, sleep often eluded him. As he made a turn onto Lexington Avenue, a figure at a bus stop caught his eye. He squinted, slowing the vehicle to a halt. There, huddled on the frigid metal bench, was a young black woman in a nurse's scrubs. Her intricate braids were damp with melting snowflakes, and her shoulders trembled beneath a coat that was clearly too thin for the weather. She sat with a rigid posture, her hands shoved deep into her pockets, staring blankly ahead. A dead phone lay in her lap, its screen dark and lifeless. A frown creased Malik's brow. Acting on impulse, he swiftly parked the car and stepped out. The bitter cold hit him instantly, slicing through his own expensive coat, but he barely registered it. He approached her with deliberate steps, the snow muffling his footfalls. She didn't notice him until he spoke. "You need to come with me." Her head snapped toward him, her eyes wide with a mix of surprise and alarm. "I am Soda. I have no idea who you are." He held her gaze, his voice low but firm. "I'm not about to leave you out here to freeze to death." "That isn't an option." She instinctively rose to her feet, putting a few feet of distance between them. "I'm okay," she insisted, though her chattering teeth and trembling voice betrayed her words. "I'm just waiting for the bus." "There won't be another bus," he stated, glancing down the vacant, snow-covered street. "Not in this weather. The whole city is shutting down. No cabs, no subways, and you're in a nurse's uniform in the middle of a blizzard." "I'll manage," she said with determination, wrapping her arms tightly around herself for warmth. He didn't step closer, but his stare held a quality that made it difficult for her to look away. It wasn't pity or desire, but something akin to a silent, profound understanding. He shrugged off his own long, black wool coat and held it out to her. "Put this on." She hesitated for a moment before her hands slowly reached out to accept it. The coat was heavy and warm, carrying a faint scent of cedar and something rich, immediately dulling the sharp bite of the cold. "I can give you a ride home," he offered simply. "Where do you live?" "Queens," she answered cautiously. "It's too far to walk, and you're right. No cab will make it through this." "My car is warm, and I promise you I'm not a threat. You can have the entire back seat to yourself. I will take you wherever you need to go. Or you can remain out here and risk hypothermia. The decision is yours." She studied him for a long, searching moment. He seemed vaguely familiar, though she couldn't place him. His face had the strong, refined features one might find in a business magazine, with deep, intelligent brown eyes, a tailored suit visible beneath a dark cashmere scarf, and close-cropped hair glistening with snowflakes. He looked like a man who had never once experienced the misery of waiting for a bus in the cold. Despite her reservations, her body made the choice for her. Her legs started moving before her mind could protest. "All right," she murmured, and he moved to open the passenger door for her. She slid inside, uncertain if this was a grave error, but keenly aware of the glorious warmth that enveloped her. The door closed with a solid, satisfying thud, silencing the wail of the wind. She watched him circle the front of the car and get in, glancing at her once more before pulling away from the curb. Neither of them spoke as the car glided down the snowy avenue. Two strangers connected only by a bizarre circumstance and the unexpected compassion of a man who, until that night, had never stopped for anyone. The software of the heater filled the silence between them as the car moved effortlessly through the snow-dusted streets. The windows gradually defogged, revealing the glittering cityscape transformed into a winter wonderland. Inside the vehicle, the warmth was a luxurious comfort after the piercing chill outside. Nia Brooks sat stiffly in the passenger seat, her hands still clutching the coat he'd given her. She drew it tighter, inhaling the unfamiliar but pleasant aroma woven into the fabric. It was the scent of wealth, certainly, but also something else, something grounding, dependable, and safe. She risked a sideways glance at the man behind the wheel. He hadn't uttered another word since she'd gotten in, his attention seemingly fixed on navigating the treacherous roads. His profile was sharp and clear in the glow of the dashboard lights. Everything about him radiated a quiet intensity and control. His posture, the expensive watch on his wrist, the steady way he gripped the steering wheel. "Thank you," she said softly, the words spoken more out of habit than anything else. He didn't turn his head. "You don't need to thank me." "You were freezing," she paused, then added, "Still, most people would have just driven by." A faint smile touched the corner of his mouth. "I'm not most people." The statement could have sounded arrogant, but it was delivered as a simple fact. They fell back into silence, and Nia finally allowed herself to relax against the plush leather seat. Now that she was warm, a wave of exhaustion washed over her. It had been a brutal 14-hour shift at the hospital. They were understaffed, she'd missed her lunch break, and a patient had gone into crisis during her final hour. She hadn't intended to miss the last bus, but that was how her life seemed to work lately, a constant, frantic scramble to keep her head above water. Her rent was overdue, her side gig at a cafe was cutting hours, and the calls from her student loan servicer were becoming more frequent. He guided the car down a ramp into a private underground garage. Nia's eyes widened as they descended into a pristine, well-lit space. This was no ordinary apartment complex. "This is where you live?" she asked, her voice laced with awe. "For now," he replied, bringing the car to a stop. "Come on. You're staying with me tonight." She blinked in surprise. "Wait, what?" "That wasn't a question," he said, already exiting the car. "You need a proper place to rest." "I have more than enough room." Her internal alarms began to sound. "I can't just stay at a stranger's penthouse." He paused by her open door, meeting her gaze without any hint of pressure or persuasion. "There are no strings attached. I'll take the guest room myself. You can lock your door if it makes you feel better, but you're not going back out into that storm." She worried her bottom lip, her mind torn between the sheer insanity of the situation and the bone-deep weariness that made the thought of that icy bus bench unbearable. After a moment, she climbed out of the car. Inside, the apartment was even more breathtaking than she had imagined. Floor-to-ceiling windows revealed a panoramic view of the sparkling, snow-covered city. A fire crackled warmly in a modern fireplace, and the silence was so profound it felt like a luxury in itself. The space was opulent yet tasteful, with a distinct masculine elegance that wasn't ostentatious. "You can have the room on the left," he said, gesturing down hallway. "You'll find some clean clothes in the dresser. They'll be too big for you, but they'll be warm." She turned to him slowly. "Why are you doing all of this?" He gave a slight shrug. "Because it was the right thing to do. And because I wanted to." That simple answer resonated with her as she made her way to the guest room. The bed was impeccably made. The linens smelled of lavender and something expensive, and everything was spotless without feeling sterile. It was clearly a lived-in space, yet it held the quiet solitude of someone who had everything and perhaps nothing at all. 15 minutes later, dressed in an oversized gray sweater and sweatpants that she had to roll up at the ankles, Nia crept back toward the kitchen. She only intended to get a glass of water, but froze in the doorway. Malik was standing at the stove, cooking. Not a private chef, not takeout, but him, in a plain white t-shirt and dark lounge pants, stirring something in a small saucepan. He glanced up and saw her standing there. "I figured you might be hungry." She was taken aback. "What are you making?" "Ramen," he answered simply. "Nothing fancy, just something warm." She moved closer, struck by how ordinary he seemed in that moment. No longer the imposing, wealthy stranger, but just a man who, for some inexplicable reason, had decided to see her, shelter her, and feed her. As she took a seat at the sleek kitchen island, he placed a steaming bowl in front of her and offered her a pair of chopsticks. She looked at him, more bewildered than ever. This was not at all how she had envisioned her night ending. He met her gaze, his expression unreadable. "You're not what I expected, either." Morning light streamed through the towering windows, casting soft, golden stripes across the guest room. Nia awoke to the rich aroma of coffee wafting through the apartment and the unfamiliar comfort of sheets, far more luxurious than any she had ever slept on. For a brief, disoriented moment, she couldn't remember where she was. Then the memories of the previous night flooded back. The snowstorm, the high-end car, and the enigmatic stranger who had made her ramen at 2 in the morning. She found a note on the kitchen counter, written in a neat, decisive script. "There's cash for a cab on the table. Feel free to leave whenever you are ready. But if you'd ever like to talk again, call me." Beneath the note lay a crisp $100 bill and a business card. Malik Osei, CEO, Osei Equity Group. She stared at the name for a long moment. It rang a bell. She'd seen it in articles, on financial news channels, a name on some power list she'd glanced at in a magazine at a grocery store checkout. So that was who he was. She pocketed the money, but left the card on the counter. 3 days went by. She did not call. But on the 4th evening, while volunteering at a community health fair sponsored by her hospital, she saw him again. He was standing near the back of the gymnasium, a quiet and composed figure amidst the chaotic bustle of nurses, patients, and donors. There was no entourage, no fanfare, just him, dressed in a sharp dark gray suit, his hands in his pockets, his eyes scanning the room until they landed on her. Nia was in the middle of helping a frail, elderly gentleman into a chair for a free health screening. The man had no identification, no insurance, and no family listed in his sparse records. Only a threadbare coat and a gentle, grateful smile. She knelt beside him, her voice soft and reassuring as she took his blood pressure with a tenderness that conveyed her belief that every human being deserved dignity, regardless of their circumstances. From across the room, Malik watched. He didn't move or interrupt, but a subtle, profound shift occurred in his expression. When the line of patients thinned and the crowd began to disperse, Nia finally noticed him. She paused, then walked over to him. "Are you following me?" she asked, her tone part joking, part genuinely curious. "No," he said. "My company sponsors this event every year. I just never expected to run into you here." She folded her arms. "Well, here I am." He glanced around the now quieting hall. "You volunteer your time after pulling 14-hour shifts," she shrugged. "People need help. I know what it's like to have none." He nodded, silent for a moment, before saying, "My mother was a nurse. She used to drag me to events like this when I was a boy. I despised it then, but now, I think I'm starting to understand." Nia tilted her head. "You never mentioned that." "There's a lot I don't mention," he replied, a ghost of a smile playing on his lips. They stood in a comfortable silence for a moment. Then he said, "Come have coffee with me." No pressure, no obligations. She hesitated again, but this time, a small nod was her answer. Coffee led to a walk. The walk led to them sitting on a bench at the edge of Central Park, where the snow had melted just enough to reveal patches of dormant grass. They didn't discuss wealth or careers or grand ambitions. They talked about insomnia, about the terrible coffee at her hospital, about books they'd both started but never managed to finish. It became their ritual. Over the subsequent weeks, they continued to meet. She began to suspect these encounters weren't entirely coincidental, but she never questioned it. Sometimes they would convene in the hospital cafeteria late at night. Other times, he would send a car to bring her to a quiet spot where he was already waiting with hot chocolate or a bag of her favorite potato chips, a detail he had picked up on after asking her once. They never put a label on their connection. They didn't hold hands or go on traditional dates. Yet it felt more genuine than any relationship she had ever known. They weren't dating. They were two souls learning how to be present in their own lives again. One night, as they sat side by side on the grand steps of the Metropolitan Museum of Art, sharing a silence filled with unspoken thoughts, She turned to him and said, "You're nothing like the man people write about." He turned to her, his voice low. "And you're not what they'd expect either," she smiled. "What do people say about me?" "That you're too kind for your own good," she shrugged. "It's not kindness. It's just humanity." He looked at her for a long moment. "Then maybe," he said, "I'm just trying to find some of my own." She didn't reply. She simply leaned back, gazing up at the stars that managed to pierce through the city's glow. And for the first time in a very long time, the night felt peaceful. Malik Osei had always been a man who thrived in silence. It was where he felt most powerful, most in control. Success had found him early, perhaps too early. By 30, he had built and sold his first major tech company before transitioning into the world of high finance, where his ruthless precision earned him a reputation that inspired both awe and fear. But for all its power, wealth had never managed to fill the profound quiet in his life. It only insulated it. He was 12 when his mother died. The cancer was swift and merciless. She had been a nurse at a small community clinic, the kind who stayed late to comfort anxious patients, who brought spare blankets from home for the unhoused, who managed to kiss her son goodnight even when she was exhausted to the point of collapse. His father, a cold man preoccupied with his own empire, had been ill-equipped to handle a grieving child. So, Malik was sent away to boarding school while his father buried himself in spreadsheets. By 25, Malik was a millionaire. By 30, a billionaire. But none of it could erase the memory of his mother. In his private office, concealed behind walls of smoked glass and polished mahogany, there was a single photograph he never touched. It was a faded picture of her in her crisp nurse's uniform, smiling at the camera as if she believed the world was in fundamentally good place. Nia's uniform had been nearly identical. It was the first thing that had truly captured his attention that snowy night, even before he noticed her trembling or the defiance in her voice. He never told Nia any of this. Instead, he began doing what he did best, working from the shadows. Through discreet legal channels, he located her outstanding student loan accounts and paid them off in full. He established a wellness fund in her name at the nursing school she'd attended. There were no press releases, no accolades sought. He noticed her hospital was struggling to maintain its charity care program, especially during the harsh winter months. An anonymous donation, more than enough to sustain it for the next 3 years, quietly appeared. He was meticulous. He never allowed her to see his hand in these matters. To Nia, he remained just Malik, enigmatic, reserved, and generous in small, personal ways, but never ostentatious. She had no idea how closely he watched over her life, how he frequently rearranged his own schedule just to be an anonymous observer at a community meeting she might attend, or how he once sat in his car for hours outside her hospital during a blizzard, just to be sure she made it in her night shift safely. He rationalized it to himself as a matter of protection, not control. He was ensuring she had the freedom to continue being the compassionate person she was. He had witnessed firsthand what relentless exhaustion did to selfless people. He had seen it in his own mother's eyes toward the end. He refused to let Nia carry that same crushing weight, at least not by herself. Some nights, after one of their quiet, informal meetings, he would return to his apartment and stand in his office, staring at his mother's photograph. He would think of the gentle way Nia smiled at her patients, of her fierce advocacy for those with nothing. "You would have loved her," he once whispered to the picture. "You were the same," but he never voiced these thoughts to Nia. Not yet. He was still learning how to expose that vulnerable part of himself, the part he had locked away long ago, when a small boy in a black suit stood beside a casket and lost his faith in the world's capacity for gentleness. With every genuine laugh, every late-night story shared over takeout containers, Nia was slowly dismantling the fortress he had spent decades building. He wasn't doing it for her gratitude. He was doing it because her very existence made the silence inside him feel less infinite. And for a man like Malik Osei, that was worth everything. The hospital corridor carried the familiar sense of antiseptic and burnt coffee. Nurses bustled from room to room. Doctors spoke in clipped tones into their phones, and the fluorescent lights overhead emitted a low hum, like a weary heart that refused to give up. In room 412, a figure lay motionless on the narrow bed. Her warm brown skin had lost its vibrant glow, her breathing was shallow, and her dark twists fanned out across the pillow like shadows in dim light. Nia had collapsed mid-shift, right in the hallway between patient rooms. She hadn't eaten in 12 hours, had worked a double shift, and was halfway through another when her vision blurred and her knees buckled. By the time a coworker caught her, she was already unconscious. Her employee file listed no emergency contact, but someone arrived all the same. Malik's black sedan pulled into the hospital's emergency bay less than 30 minutes after the call. There was no hesitation, no slowing down. As he strode into the building, the staff looked up, not because they recognized him, but because of the sheer force of his presence. A man who clearly did not belong in places like this unless something significant had occurred. He reached her room, pushed open the door, and froze. She looked so small, so fragile. And 4-line was taped to her arm, silently dripping fluids into her vein like a quiet apology for the demands her body had endured. Her chest rose and fell with labor breaths. He entered the room, his steps uncharacteristically slow, and took a seat in the chair beside her bed. For a long moment, he did nothing but watch her. Then, he reached out and gently took her hand. It was cool to the touch. He cradled it between both of his own, a protective gesture he dimly remembered his mother using when he was a sick child. He closed his eyes. When Nia awoke 2 hours later, it was to the sensation of warmth enveloping her hand. Her eyelids fluttered open, and the first thing she saw was him. Malik was sitting there, his shirt sleeves rolled up, his tie loosened, his hair slightly disheveled, as if he'd run his hands through it repeatedly. "What?" she whispered, her voice hoarse. "You collapsed," he said, his voice tight with strain. "Severe dehydration and exhaustion." She slowly blinked, her focus clearing. "Oh, is that the official diagnosis?" His voice cracked, and when she turned to look at him properly, she saw a storm brewing in his dark eyes. She tried to sit up, wincing in pain. "It's not a big deal. I just overdid it a little." "A little?" he shot back, rising abruptly to his feet. "You're working 2 jobs. You're skipping meals. You barely sleep. You think that's nothing?" She flinched, not from physical pain, but from the raw edge in his voice. "Malik, no," he cut in, pacing the small room now, his hands clenched into fists. "You should have told me. I could have. It would have helped." "I didn't want your help," she retorted, and a tense silence filled the space between them. He turned to her slowly. Nia's eyes welled with tears, her voice trembling with a mix of pride and frustration. "I've been taking care of myself since I was 16 years old. No one ever shows up. No one ever stays. And I didn't want to be in your debt. I didn't want you to see me as some project to be fixed." He moved toward her slowly. She wiped angrily at her tears, ashamed. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to fall apart." "You're not falling apart," he said, his voice softening. "You've been holding the entire world on your shoulders with your bare hands." She met his gaze, her own open and vulnerable. He sat on the edge of the bed again, more gently this time, and took her hand back into his grip now firm and certain. "Not anymore," he said quietly, the anger gone, replaced by something far deeper. "From now on, you let me take care of you." She stared at him, stunned. He didn't say it like a man claiming possession. He said it like a man making a solemn vow. Tears streamed down her face, and this time, she didn't pull her hand away. And for the first time in as long as she could remember, Nia felt what it was like to be truly seen, to be cared for, not because she had asked for it, not because she had earned it, but simply because someone refused to let her hurt alone. The transition to living together was unspoken. There was no formal discussion, no grand proposal, no moving boxes or lease agreements. One evening, Malik had driven Nia back to her small apartment, and she had simply remarked, "I don't really live here anymore, do I?" He had given a single, decisive nod, and from that point on, her belongings began to quietly migrate into his space. They never addressed it, they just adapted. Her nursing scrubs were folded neatly beside his bespoke suits in the walk-in closet. Her toothbrush took up residence next to his in the marble bathroom. He cleared out a kitchen drawer for her collection of herbal teas and left a soft, plush blanket permanently draped over the arm of the sofa because he knew she was always cold. Still, there were no whispered declarations of love, no candlelit dinners, no arms pulling her close in the middle of the night. He continued to sleep on the sofa. At first, she assumed it was a gesture of chivalry. Then, she wondered if he was uncomfortable. Finally, she realized he was afraid of something he couldn't name. He was learning intimacy, but at a glacial pace. Malik's affection was demonstrated through actions, not words. Whenever Nia worked a night shift, a thermos of her favorite soup would be waiting for her in the staff lounge. A simple note taped to it, "Eat, please." A candid photo he had taken of her laughing in Central Park appeared in a silver frame on his office desk, a space no one else ever entered. When she once left her jacket at home on a chilly day, a courier appeared at the hospital with a brand new one, impeccably tailored, luxurious, and undoubtedly expensive. He never said, "I miss you," but he began canceling afternoon meetings just to walk her to the hospital for a shift. She knew he cared, but she didn't know if he understood what that truly meant, because there remained a quiet, invisible wall between them that she couldn't seem to scale. He never verbalized his feelings, never reached for her hand in public, and never once asked her to join him in his bed. It wasn't because he didn't desire her, she sensed, but because he didn't know how to need someone out loud. And gradually, that profound silence began to wear on her. One evening, Nia came home from a long shift to find the penthouse quiet, as always. The lights were low, a fire was glowing in the hearth, and her favorite novel was resting on the arm of the couch where she'd left it. But he was absent. She found him in his office, staring out the window at the city lights. The photograph of his mother was on the credenza beside him, her own framed photo just inches away. She stepped into the room, her voice soft. "You always look at that picture when something is bothering you." He didn't turn around. "It helps me remember." "Remember what?" His silence stretched on. "That people like her, and like you, still exist in this world." She swallowed, her throat tight. "Malik," she whispered, "what are we doing?" He finally turned to face her. "What do you mean?" She gestured between the two of them. "This. We live together. We share our days. We eat meals together. But we don't touch. We don't say the important things. I don't even know for sure if you want me here." "I want you here," he said, the words rushing out a little too quickly. "Then why does it feel like I'm a permanent guest in your life?" Her voice broke. "Why won't you let me all the way in?" He looked down, his jaw tight. "Because the people I let in always leave." "I'm not people," she said, her voice gaining strength. "I'm me." "I know." His voice was barely a whisper. "That's what makes it so much harder." She stared at him for a long moment, then said gently, "I love you, Malik. I think I have for some time now." He looked up at her, his eyes wide with shock, but he said nothing. The silence that followed was heavy and absolute, and in that moment she knew. She gave a slow, sad nod, a bittersweet smile touching her lips. "It's okay," she whispered. "You don't have to say it back." "But I can't keep waiting for a man who is afraid to feel." She turned and walked out of the office. That night, she quietly packed a bag. He didn't try to stop her. He stood in the hallway, one hand braced against the doorframe, his lips parted as if to speak, his entire body rigid with some internal battle. But the words never came. When the front door clicked shut behind her, the silence in the apartment transformed. It was no longer peaceful. It was crushing. The quiet Nia left in her wake was deafening. For days, Malik drifted through his penthouse like a ghost. The fireplace remained unlit. Her blanket stayed folded on the couch, a silent accusation. Her teacup sat unwashed in the sink. Her scent lingered on the coat she had left behind, and he found himself standing in empty doorways, subconsciously looking for her. His focus at work evaporated. Important calls from investors went to voicemail. A multi-million-dollar acquisition was postponed, an unprecedented move in his 15-year career. His executive assistant knocked tentatively on his office door one afternoon. "Mr. Osei, The board in Tokyo is awaiting your final approval. He was staring at the photo on his desk. The one of Nia. The one he couldn't bear to put away. Cancel the meeting, he said, his voice hollow. The assistant looked stunned. Sir, but... I said, cancel it. Then he stood, grabbed his coat, and walked out of the building without another word. He had to find her. It was late when he reached the hospital. A light snow had begun to fall again, dusting the city in a fresh layer of white. The world bustled around him as he pushed through the glass doors into the sterile, brightly lit lobby, a stark contrast to the warmth she had once brought into his life. He approached the main reception desk and asked for her by name. The nurse on duty consulted her computer, then frowned. Nia Brooks, she murmured. Our records show she transferred out 2 weeks ago. His heart plummeted. Transfer? Yes, the nurse said, her tone professional but sympathetic. She no longer works at this facility. I'm sorry, but she didn't leave a forwarding address. He stood there for a long moment. The sounds of the busy lobby, the hurried footsteps of doctors, the beeping of machines, the murmur of anxious families, fading into a dull roar. She didn't even say goodbye, he whispered to himself. The nurse looked up, her expression softening with understanding. Are you family, sir? He paused. No, he said quietly. I guess I'm not. He turned and walked back outside, the cold air a sharp sting against his skin. Snowflakes landed on his dark coat, melting instantly. He walked into the hospital's courtyard and stopped in the center, surrounded by barren trees and empty benches. A tightness constricted his chest. He tilted his face toward the sky, his eyes growing hot with unshed tears. She was the only thing, he whispered, his voice breaking, that made me feel human, and the snow continued to fall. Winter had returned to New York, bringing with it a quiet flurry of snow that softened the city's hard edges. A full year had passed since Nia had left, a year since she had walked away from the man who was still learning the language of love. She was different now, more grounded, more self-assured. As the newly appointed head nurse at a small community hospital in upstate New York, she commanded respect and was a pillar of her new community. Yet, on quiet nights, with a warm cup of tea in her hands, her thoughts still drifted back to him. She still wondered if he had ever looked for her, still felt the ghost of his unspoken emotions. Then the call came. Her aunt had suffered a minor stroke, and Nia returned to the city to be her caretaker. She took a small rental on the Upper East Side, telling herself the arrangement was only temporary. One snowy morning, while on a walk through familiar streets, she found her feet carrying her to a small, charming flower shop she had once admired. It was the same one where, long ago, she had seen Malik buying a small bouquet for a child. The bell above the door chimed as she entered. And there he was. His back was to her, tall and still, as he carefully selected a stem of white tulips from a bucket. She froze. He turned, and their eyes met across the fragrant, humid air of the shop. For a heartbeat, the world seemed to stand still. Malik looked older, the lines around his eyes deeper, but there was a new softness in his expression, a kindness that had replaced some of the old intensity. He was still entirely himself, yet transformed. He gently placed the flowers back on the display and took a step toward her. Close, but not too close. You're coming with me, he said, his voice a low murmur. The words were a direct echo of that first night, but now they were imbued with a deep, vulnerable truth. He paused, his gaze unwavering. If you'll still have me. I never stopped waiting. Tears sprang to her eyes before she could stop them. She could only nod, her throat too tight for words. He reached for her hand, his touch tentative and full of a soft wonder, as if he feared she might vanish. But when their fingers intertwined, it was with the certainty of someone who understood the profound pain of loss and who would never let go again. He brought her home, not to the sterile, high-tech penthouse, but to a warm, inviting brownstone on the edge of Central Park. The space was filled with thriving plants, soft lighting, and 1,000 small details that were echoes of her. Her blanket, her photo, her memory, all cherished and preserved. You kept everything, she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. I kept you, he corrected her softly. 6 months later, They were married on a warm summer morning in the newly restored garden of Malik's ancestral family home. Laughter and music filled the air. The guest list was small but meaningful: cherished colleagues, former patients, and friends who had witnessed their journey. Among them sat the elderly gentleman Nia had so tenderly cared for at the hospital fundraiser, the very moment Malik had truly seen her. He insisted on giving a toast during the reception. "She has always been an angel," he said, his voice trembling with tears. "And now she has found her guardian." Malik spoke his vows from the heart, his prepared notes forgotten. "I didn't know how to love before you," he said, his gaze locked on hers. "But I promised to spend every day of my life learning how with you." Nia reached up to touch his cheek, her own voice soft but sure. "We'll learn together." That night, long after the last guest had departed and the candles had burned low, they sat wrapped in a single blanket on the porch of their new home, listening to the gentle rumble of a distant summer storm. Nia leaned her head against his shoulder, a contented smile on her face. "I never imagined that a freezing night at a bus stop would lead me home." Malik pressed a kiss to her hair, his voice a warm whisper against the wind. "That night," he said, turning her face gently to meet his, "I wasn't saving you." His eyes held hers, full of a love that was no longer silent. "You were saving me." And that was the story of a cold night, a quiet man, and the woman who taught him that love was a language worth learning. Sometimes, the people who rescue us don't arrive with grand, heroic gestures. They appear with quiet acts of kindness, a warm bowl of late-night ramen, and a hand held steady in the darkness. If this story resonated with you, if it served as a reminder that love can blossom in the most unexpected seasons of life, we invite you to like, share, and most importantly, subscribe to our channel for more tales inspired by real life that aim to warm your heart, lift your spirit, and linger with you long after they conclude. Until we meet again, stay warm, be kind, and never forget that sometimes the most unassuming encounter can change absolutely everything.